What's going on? Today we're going to be taking a look at this Cricut maker, and I'll be showing you how to replace these two rubber drive wheels on the drive rod. This is essential if you want to continue to use your Cricut maker as they fall apart after a while. It's a relatively easy process. Jumping right into this, we're going to need to remove this cover. And you can use a flathead screwdriver or just something to pop it off and get it out of the way. And then we have 4 screws. These are going to be Torx bits. You're going to need a T8 screwdriver bit to get those screws out and pop the lid off. Speaking of other tools, you really don't need a whole lot. A few sets of screwdrivers, a flathead, some needle nose pliers. I happen to have this set here that has a bunch of different bits, including the T8 that you need to get the lid off. But most of this stuff can be done with normal screwdrivers minus that part. It's also important to know that a small screwdriver will come in handy when we go to get inside, as you don't have a lot of space. The next step is going to be jumping into removing these rubber caps, or the little things that just keep the Cricut from moving around when it's in use. I'm again using a flathead screwdriver to get those out of the way so that we can get the 4 screws out of the bottom of those holes, and that helps to secure the lid on. Step number 3 is going to be kind of tricky. It's not hard to do, but you have to work in a tight space. You can see up here towards the top, we've got some screws that we're going to need to remove. And this is where the small screwdriver really comes in handy. You have a total of 7 Phillips head screws that we're going to have to remove. It's really hard to see all 7. There's 2 or 3 that you can easily see, and then there's going to be some kind of hiding closer to the top of the ceiling of this. Now, once we figure out how to get our hands and screwdriver in here, it's also important to note that you may have to move the head of the Cricut maker out of the way to find the other screws. And it is perfectly okay to just push that head where you need to access the other screws. Once we have all 7 of these little dudes out, we are now ready to pop off the lid to the Cricut maker. This might take a little bit of finagling, as they have little plastic retaining spots that want to keep the lid on, but with a little bit of effort you can get it to pop off. And it's also important to note that there is a wire attached to this lid. So when you go to rip it off, make sure that you know there's a wire on the right side of the machine. We're going to go ahead and take the lid and just set it out of the way. And now we have access to the innards. This is the rod that we're going to need to remove to get to those rubber wheels. So step number 1, once we have the lid off, is going to be going to the right side of the machine and taking this little retention spring off. That's where the needle nose pliers come in handy. And then if you look over here where I'm at, you'll see this little retaining clip, and at the end of the rod there is a C-shaped retaining clip that we're going to need to pop off of there. And if you've never messed with these, you might not exactly know how to do it, but a little flathead screwdriver or just something to stick up under the holes and popping it off typically works pretty good. Once we have that retaining clip off of there, we can take this little bracket and pull it off and just get it out of the way. And then we're done with that side. Now we're going to be moving to the left side of the machine, and we're going to need to have access to that same thing just on the left side. Once we're over here, though, you can see the motor is in the way, so we're going to be taking these 4 screws out and removing the motor mount so that we can gain access to that C-shaped retaining clip to get it off of there. There are 2 sets of screws on each side. The right side has 2 black screws and the left side has 2 galvanized screws. And we'll make sure to remember that when we go to put this thing back together. Once we get the screws out, you can see the motor just comes right off, and then there's this little support bracket that you can also just move and get out of the way. Once those items are out of our way, we're going to look at this little plastic gear. You can see that in order to get to where we need to get to, we have to kind of pull that gear out of the way some, and that will be okay to do. Once we do, and you look a little closer down in there, you can see this other C-shaped retaining clip that we're going to need to get to. And again, this is where you just get your flathead screwdriver or something small to get up in there and apply a little bit of pressure and pull up. And once you pull it up, it should pop right off. These are a little tricky. Like I said, if you've never messed with them, they can kind of give you troubles, but just keep at it and you'll get it. Next, we're going to be taking off the spring, just like we did on the other side, and now we have access to the rod. This is pretty much all you need to know to be able to do this procedure. The rest of the video is showing you how to put the rubber wheels on the rod and then putting the machine back together. In order to get this rod out, we're going to need to push the rod to the right and then pull up the left side up and out. This was a little tricky as there's not a lot of space, and it kind of felt like I wasn't going to get it, but with a little bit of patience, I was able to pull the whole rod out of there. And while we have this machine broken down and the rod out of the way, I just spent a little bit of extra time with some acetone to clean up all the residue that was underneath of the rod. Part of using the Cricut is applying spray adhesive to your backer cards or whatever, so a lot of that had just built up over time and wanted to get it clean. Now, we've got the rubber wheels off and the new ones on, and we're looking at the rod. You can see here that there are 2 different ends to the rod. One on the left is thicker, and the one on the right kind of has a step down. So you're going to want to put that step down in first on the right side, and you're going to just put it in the hole until you get the rod back in there. If you try to do this the other way, it simply won't work. So just be sure and follow those directions, and it shouldn't give you any troubles. Now that we have the rod back in place, we're going to go for the 2 C-shaped retaining clips and put them back on to the ends of the rod. If you notice here, there's really no space to put the clips on the rod as it's sitting flush on the bracket. So if that happens to you, you have to just make sure the rod is pushed in all the way, and that way you can see there's enough space to get that retaining clip back on there. Once we do that, it's back to putting the spring back up on and just using the needle nose pliers for that. And then that way it applies downward pressure to the actual drive rod and it will function correctly. Now that we have that part done, we're going to put this little bracket back on first before we put the motor on. That actually goes behind the motor. And then if you notice, the motor has a plastic gear attached to it, and that's what drives the bigger wheel. So when you go to put this back on there, you want to make sure that everything is lined up, including those gears. And it's pretty easy to do because it really only fits on there correctly if everything is lined up, if that makes sense. Once we have everything lined up in position and I've got the top right screw in, just to kind of hold it, we're going to go ahead and insert the other screws. Now, if you remember when we took these off, we had 2 that were black. Those go on the right side, and then 2 that are silver or galvanized, and those go on the left side. And once we have them in, we're just going to double check and make sure that the gear is functioning You can see that when I move the big one, the motor gear is moving as well, so that's a really good sign. The next step is just throwing in those last few screws and getting the motor reinstalled. Now we're going to jump back to the right side of the machine. We're going to put our little clip back on here, and then we're going to put the C-shaped retaining clip back on the end of the rod. And this part can be a little tricky getting them back on there. They do make special tools for these, but I don't really think they're necessary. A pair of needle nose pliers or something just to be able to kind of line it up and push it back on the rod should be good enough. And then we're going to move to also putting the spring back on this side, which again helps hold that rod down tight onto the mat. And that's pretty much a wrap. Now we're putting the lid back on it, making sure that all the wires are tucked in correctly and that the lid seats properly. Once we have that on there, we're going to go ahead and put our 7 screws back in the ceiling of the machine and then put the 4 bigger screws on the bottom. The last thing to do is to put the lid back on, and those are the T8 Torx bits. You have 4 of those that will secure the lid, and then just putting that little cover back on, and presto, we are done. Here it is in action after it's all finished up, and you can tell by looking at the video here, it really is important to have those wheels in good working order. This machine really does rely on the very slight and subtle movements to work correctly. Hopefully this quick video helped you guys out. Let me know what you think, and if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to ask. I will get back with you and assist you the best I can. Really appreciate you guys watching.